Hey there, it's me Eden. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access, link in the description.
Martha stood frozen in front of the mirror, staring at the girl she wasn't ready to say goodbye to. The silk nightgown draped over her frame, delicate and light, as if it belonged to her. As if she belonged in it. Her hands trembled as she reached up to touch her face, fingers grazing the faint shimmer of gloss still clinging to her lips. Last night, she had looked at herself and seen Martha for the first time. But now, in the sharp light of morning, she wasn't so sure. Would she still be Martha once she put on Martin's clothes? Would everything she felt last night just disappear? She let out a shaky breath. She had to get dressed. Her mother was waiting downstairs. Michelle was covering for her, but that wouldn't last forever. Her hands moved on autopilot, reaching for the pile of clothes she had worn yesterday, Martin's clothes. She hesitated. Her fingers barely brushed the fabric of the plain t-shirt before pulling away like it had burned her. Her heart started pounding. She didn't want to put them on. She didn't want to feel that way again. The way she had always felt before last night, like she was wrong, like something was missing, like she had been pretending her whole life. But what choice did she have? Her mother was downstairs. The world was waiting. And the world expected Martin. Her stomach twisted as she picked up the shirt again, her grip tight, knuckles turning white. It was just clothes. Just fabric. Just. Her chest tightened. She couldn't do it. She couldn't put it back on. Not yet. Not after this. A knock at the bathroom door made her jump. Martha. Michelle's voice was soft, careful. Martha swallowed hard. Why, yeah? A pause. You okay? No. Not even close. I don't know. Michelle sighed from the other side of the door. Can I come in? Martha hesitated before unlocking the door. Michelle slipped inside and closed it again behind her, looking her up and down. Still in the nightgown, huh? Martha nodded slowly, gripping the fabric. I tried, but I just... Her voice wavered. I can't. Michelle studied her for a long moment before leaning against the sink. Yeah, I figured. Martha's eyes darted to her. You figured? Michelle shrugged. Martha, last night wasn't just some dress-up game. This wasn't some phase or random curiosity. This was you. Martha swallowed. Michelle's voice softened. And now you're scared to lose that. Martha didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Michelle sighed. Look, I get it. But you have to remember, just because you take the nightgown off doesn't mean you stop being Martha. Martha looked down at herself. But it feels like it will. Michelle stepped closer. It won't. Martha's throat tightened. Then why does it feel this way? Because you've been told your whole life that you're someone you're not, Michelle said simply. Because last night was the first time you actually saw yourself. And now, putting on those clothes again feels like, what? Martha clenched her jaw. Burying her. Michelle nodded. Yeah, exactly. Martha blinked, her chest tight, the weight of that truth settling over her like a heavy blanket. Michelle crossed her arms. So, here's what we're gonna do. You do have to get dressed, because, unfortunately, the world isn't ready for you to walk downstairs in a nightgown. She smirked. But that doesn't mean you have to bury Martha. Okay. Martha hesitated. How? Michelle reached into her back pocket and pulled something out. A hairband. A simple, pink hairband. She held it out. Keep something from last night. Something small. Something just for you. Martha stared at it. It was so small, just an accessory, nothing major. But somehow it felt huge. She reached out slowly, fingers brushing against the soft fabric before taking it. Michelle smiled. See? You're still you. Martha exhaled. One step at a time. She turned back to the mirror. The nightgown still looked perfect on her. She still felt perfect in it. But for now, she had to take the next step. She changed quickly, slipping into Martin's clothes, but this time, they felt different. Looser. Less like they belonged to her. She tied the hairband around her wrist, the soft pink fabric a small, secret piece of herself. Michelle gave her an approving nod. Better. Martha took a deep breath. Yeah, better. And for the first time in her life, putting on Martin's clothes didn't mean she was disappearing. Because Martha wasn't going anywhere. Martha hesitated at the top of the stairs, her fingers absently tugging at the pink hairband wrapped around her wrist. It was small, almost insignificant, but right now it felt like a lifeline. Her mother's voice drifted up from the kitchen. Martin? Breakfast is ready. Martha flinched at the name. Last night, it had felt like it belonged to someone else. Now, she was expected to wear it again. She inhaled sharply and turned to Michelle, who stood beside her, arms crossed, watching her carefully. Okay, Michelle murmured. Deep breath. Martha obeyed, filling her lungs before slowly exhaling. You're okay, Michelle said. Martha nodded, even though she wasn't sure if it was true. Michelle smirked. Just act normal. Nobody suspects a thing. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. Because part of her wanted to be seen. Part of her wanted to walk downstairs as Martha, to sit at the kitchen table in her nightgown, her nails still pink, her hair brushed just right. She wanted to feel the morning sun on her skin as herself. But she couldn't. Not yet. One step at a time. Martha straightened her shoulders and took the first step. The second was easier. By the time she reached the last stair, her heart had steadied, just a little. The smell of breakfast filled the kitchen, coffee, eggs, toast. Her mother stood at the stove, humming softly, flipping pancakes onto a plate. Morning, sweetie, she said without turning around. You sleep okay? Martha hesitated. Michelle brushed past her, answering for her. Oh, we slept great. She flopped onto a chair, grabbing a piece of toast. Her mother turned, smiling. Glad to hear it. Martha forced herself to move, slipping into her usual seat. The chair felt too big. Or maybe she felt too small. Her mother set a plate in front of her. Eat up. I need you to help me with some things today. Martha nodded absently, poking at her eggs with a fork. It felt strange, sitting here, pretending like nothing had changed. Like last night hadn't happened. But she had changed. And the world hadn't. Her mother glanced at her. You okay, honey? You're quiet this morning. Martha's grip tightened on her fork. Michelle jumped in smoothly. Oh, he's just tired. We stayed up late telling ghost stories. Their mother chuckled. I should have guessed. You two always find a way to turn bedtime into an event. Martha forced a smile. Yeah, guess so. Michelle shot her a subtle look. Breathe. Martha exhaled slowly. The conversation drifted to small talk, Brenda's plans for the day, something their dad had mentioned before leaving for work. Martha barely registered any of it. She was too busy focusing on holding herself together. Then, just as she thought she might make it through breakfast without issue, her mother's eyes flickered downward, to her wrist. Martha's stomach flipped. What's this? Her mother reached out, brushing her fingers over the pink hairband. Martha's pulse roared in her ears. She hadn't even thought about it. Hadn't considered that it would stand out. It was just a hairband. But it was also everything. Michelle cut in, casual as ever. Oh, that? I gave it to him last night. We were messing around with Brenda's stuff. Martha swallowed hard. Was that enough? Her mother smiled, completely unfazed. Well, it looks cute on you. Martha's breath caught. For a split second, she felt it again, that warmth, that rightness, that sense of being seen. It was gone just as quickly, her mother already turning back to the sink. But the words stayed with her. It looks cute on you. She exhaled slowly, staring at the hairband. Maybe she could hold on to this. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning. You said. Please continue with next chapter and please make it broader. ChatGPT said. Chapter 19. Martha sat frozen, staring at the pink hairband wrapped around her wrist. It looks cute on you. Her mother had said it so casually without a second thought. Like it was nothing. But to Martha, it was everything. Her fingers brushed over the fabric, her heart pounding. Did she know? Had her mother seen through the thin veil of normalcy Martha was desperately trying to hold in place? Across the table, Michelle was watching her carefully, her expression unreadable. "You good?" she asked under her breath. Martha swallowed and gave the smallest nod. She had to be good. She had to act normal. She picked up her fork again, forcing herself to take a bite of eggs. The taste barely registered. The conversation at the table moved on. Her mother started talking about grocery shopping, something about Brenda needing a ride later. Normal, everyday things. But Martha couldn't focus. She felt like she was balancing on the edge of something fragile. Like one wrong move could send her tumbling back into the before. Before she knew what it felt like to be Martha. Before she knew what it meant to be herself. Her mother sat down with her coffee, finally settling at the table. She glanced at Martha again, her eyes soft. "You sure you're okay, sweetheart?" Sweetheart. Her mother called her that all the time. It was a nothing word, a habit. But for some reason, today it felt different. Martha swallowed. "Yeah, just tired." Her mother gave her a warm smile, reaching out to squeeze her hand briefly. "Well, get some rest today if you need to." Martha nodded, gripping her fork tightly. Rest. If only that were the problem. Michelle stretched her arms dramatically. "Welp, I should probably head out before my mom starts sending search parties." She shot a look at Martha. "Walk me to the door?" Martha hesitated, then nodded quickly. Yeah. She needed to get out of this room. They stood up together, and as Martha passed her mother, she felt her eyes flicker toward her wrist again. But she didn't say anything. Didn't question it. Didn't ask why her son was wearing a pink hairband. And somehow, that was even more terrifying than if she had. Martha followed Michelle down the hall to the front door, her stomach still twisting. As soon as the door shut behind them, she exhaled sharply, pressing a hand against her forehead. "I almost died in there." Michelle snorted. "Drama queen." Martha shot her a look. "Michelle." She saw it. Michelle shrugged. And Martha waved her hands. She didn't say anything. Michelle smirked. "I mean, do you want her to?" Martha froze. The question hit harder than she expected. Did she? She didn't know. She wasn't ready. Was she? Michelle leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. "Look, if she noticed, she probably just thought you were messing around. She's not gonna assume anything from a little hairband." Martha nodded, trying to let that sink in. It was fine. It had to be fine. She took a deep breath. "Okay. Yeah. I'm good." Michelle tilted her head. "You sure?" Martha hesitated, then gave a small smile. "No. But I'll get there." Michelle grinned. "That's my girl." The words sent a warm shiver through Martha's chest. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to hear them. The door clicked shut as Michelle left, and suddenly, Martha was alone. Alone with the weight of the morning. Alone with the lingering warmth of Michelle's words, "That's my girl." Alone with the knowledge that, for the first time, she had stepped into the world carrying a piece of Martha with her. And it hadn't shattered. Her fingers toyed with the pink hairband on her wrist as she stood in the entryway, staring at the door. Michelle had been right. Her mother probably hadn't thought much about it. But that didn't stop the thought from gnawing at her. What if she had noticed? What if she had suspected? Would that be so bad? Martha exhaled sharply and turned away from the door, heading back toward the kitchen. She had to push those thoughts aside. She wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. One step at a time. Her mother was still sitting at the table, her coffee cup resting between her hands, flipping absent-mindedly through the newspaper. She glanced up as Martha entered. "Did Michelle get home okay?" Martha nodded. "Yeah." Her mom was already on the way to pick her up. Her mother hummed in response, turning another page. Martha hesitated near the table, unsure what to do with herself. She didn't feel like sitting down again, didn't feel like eating anymore. Her mother took a sip of her coffee, then looked up at her again. This time, her gaze lingered. Martha stiffened. There was something different about the way she was looking at her. Not suspicious. Not confused. Just studying her. Martha forced herself to keep still, resisting the urge to tug her sleeve over her wrist. "You sure you're feeling okay?" her mother asked. Martha swallowed. Yeah, just a lot on my mind, I guess. Her mother smiled knowingly. Sleepovers will do that. I remember staying up late with my friends, talking about everything under the sun. The next day, I'd always feel like my brain was still catching up. Martha let out a small, nervous laugh. Yeah, something like that. Her mother studied her for another second, then reached over and gave her hand a quick squeeze. Well, you seem happy today. Martha blinked. What? Her mother chuckled. You just seem. I don't know. Lighter. She took another sip of coffee. Whatever you and Michelle got up to last night, I'm glad you had fun. Martha's breath caught in her throat. You seem happy today. Was it that obvious? She almost wanted to ask, do I? Do I really? Because the truth was, she did feel lighter. She felt different. Like something had shifted, like something inside her had finally been allowed to breathe. Like she had spent her whole life holding her breath without realizing it. And now, for the first time, she was exhaling. Martha forced a small smile. Yeah, it was fun. Her mother nodded approvingly, then stood up, stretching. All right, I've got some errands to run. You want to come with me? Martha hesitated. Going out meant stepping back into the world as Martin. It meant slipping into that version of herself again, the one everyone expected to see. But maybe it didn't have to feel that way. She looked down at the pink hairband on her wrist. Maybe she could carry a piece of Martha with her. She took a breath. Yeah, I'll go. Her mother smiled. Great. Go get ready. Martha turned to leave, her fingers brushing against the soft fabric around her wrist. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't pretending. She was still here. One step at a time, Martha climbed the stairs slowly, her mind racing with each step. She had agreed to go with her mother, but now that she was actually heading to get dressed, reality was settling in. Going out meant wearing Martin's clothes. Going out meant looking like Martin, acting like Martin, being Martin. Her stomach twisted. She had spent last night feeling more like herself than she ever had before. And now she was expected to just push that away? She reached her bedroom door but didn't go inside. Instead, she hesitated in the hallway, her fingers brushing lightly over the pink hairband on her wrist. Last night had been real. It had been her. Would that disappear the moment she stepped into the world? A soft creak behind her made her jump. She turned to see Brenda's bedroom door slightly ajar, her sister's neatly organized space visible inside. Her chest tightened. Brenda's room had always been a place of fascination, filled with things that had always felt off limits. The closet full of dresses, the makeup on her vanity, the perfume bottles lined up in perfect rows. Martha glanced down at her own wrist again, then back at the door. Maybe. She stepped forward cautiously, pushing the door open just enough to slip inside. The room smelled like vanilla and fabric softener. Sunlight streamed in through the window, casting soft shadows along the floor. Martha's heart pounded. She wasn't here to take anything. She just needed a moment. Her feet carried her toward the vanity before she even realized she was moving. She ran her fingers lightly over the smooth surface, over the makeup brushes, the tubes of lipstick, the bottles of nail polish. Then she looked up. Her reflection stared back at her. But this time, she didn't just see Martin. She saw Martha. The same eyes, the same face, the same shape, but something was different now. She knew who she was. Even in Martin's clothes. Her fingers twitched at her sides. Slowly, she reached out and picked up a tube of lip gloss. The same kind Michelle had used last night. She hesitated. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she unscrewed the cap and swiped a thin layer over her lips. It was subtle. Barely there. But she knew. She pressed her lips together, a small thrill running through her. This was her. A small, secret piece of herself she could carry with her into the world. A knock at the door sent a jolt of panic through her. Marty? Martha's stomach lurched. Brenda. She barely had time to react before the door pushed open. Brenda stepped inside, holding her phone in one hand, her brows furrowed. What are you? She stopped. Her gaze dropped to the lip gloss in Martha's hand. Martha's breath caught. For a long, stretched out second, neither of them spoke. Then Brenda's expression softened.
Oh!
Martha's hands clenched around the tube of gloss. But Brenda just smiled. A small, understanding smile. She took a step closer, tilting her head. You look cute. Martha's breath hitched. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected any of this. Brenda reached out, plucked the lip gloss from Martha's fingers, and handed it back to her. You can borrow it if you want. Martha's heart nearly stopped. She stared at her sister, waiting for some kind of punchline, some kind of you better not tell anyone, but it never came. Brenda just squeezed her shoulder gently. You ready to go? Martha swallowed hard. One step at a time. She nodded. Brenda gave her a final smile before turning and heading back downstairs. Martha stood frozen in place, her pulse still racing. Brenda knew. Brenda saw her. And she hadn't freaked out. She looked back at her reflection, pressing her lips together again. Martha was still here. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Martha stood in front of the mirror for a long time after Brenda left. Her fingers hovered over her lips, where the faint layer of gloss still lingered. Brenda had seen her. Really seen her. And she hadn't laughed. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't asked why her little brother was in her room holding a tube of lip gloss. She had just smiled. You look cute. Martha swallowed hard. It had been such a simple thing to say. So small. So casual. But it meant everything. She wasn't sure what to do with that feeling. She had spent all morning preparing herself to hide again, to push everything from last night down deep inside and pretend it had never happened. But now she wasn't so sure she could pretend anymore. She wasn't even sure she wanted to. Martha glanced down at the lip gloss in her hand, her grip tightening around it. Could she really just go downstairs like this? With it still on? Would her mother notice? Would Brenda say something? The thought made her stomach twist. She should wipe it off. That was the safe thing to do. But part of her didn't want to. Part of her wanted to keep this tiny piece of Martha with her. She took a deep breath, pressing her lips together one more time before tucking the lip gloss into her pocket. She could wipe it off later, if she needed to. She turned toward the dresser, pulling open the drawers where her usual clothes were neatly folded. She stared down at them, suddenly feeling detached, like these weren't really hers. The t-shirts, the jeans, the socks, they weren't wrong, exactly. They just didn't feel right. She grabbed a shirt and pulled it over her head, the fabric heavy in a way it had never been before. Then she reached for the jeans. As she slipped them on, she hesitated again. The pink hairband. She had left it on her wrist, like a tiny act of rebellion. A secret. A promise to herself. Her fingers brushed over it lightly. She should take it off. She should. But she didn't. Instead, she turned and faced the mirror again, taking in her reflection. From the outside, nothing had changed. No dress. No makeup. But she had changed. And she knew it. She adjusted her sleeve slightly, making sure the hairband was still visible, and took one last deep breath before heading downstairs. The kitchen was quiet when she entered. Brenda was leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone. Their mother was at the sink, rinsing dishes. The smell of coffee and syrup still lingered in the air. There you are, her mother said without turning around. You sure you're up for going out? You still look a little sleepy. Martha hesitated for only a second before nodding. Yeah, I'm good. Brenda glanced up from her phone and gave her a knowing smile. We ready? Their mother dried her hands and grabbed her purse. Let's get moving before the stores get too busy. Martha followed them to the door, her fingers curling into her palm as they stepped outside. The world felt different. Not because it had changed, but because she had. Brenda nudged her as they walked to the car, lowering her voice. Still got my lip gloss? Martha's breath hitched. She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing against the cool plastic tube. Brenda grinned, like she already knew the answer. Good. Martha didn't say anything. She didn't have to. For the first time, she wasn't alone. And that was enough. The car ride was quiet, but Martha's thoughts were anything but. She sat in the back seat, staring out the window as her mother drove, watching the town pass by in a blur of familiar streets and storefronts. But today, everything felt different. It wasn't the town that had changed. It was her. Last night had felt like stepping into a dream, one where she got to be herself, where she got to exist as Martha without fear or hesitation. But now, in the harsh light of day, the world was pressing in again, expecting her to go back to the way things were. Expecting her to be Martin. She clenched her fingers in her lap. But she wasn't Martin. Not really. Not anymore. She glanced down at her wrist, where the pink hairband rested just beneath the sleeve of her hoodie. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. Her proof. Her reminder. She flexed her fingers, grounding herself in that thought. She wasn't hiding. Not completely. Beside her, Brenda was scrolling through her phone, looking as relaxed as ever. But every now and then, she'd glance at Martha, just a flick of the eyes, quick, subtle. She knew. And she hadn't said a word since they left the house. Martha wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. Her mother finally broke the silence. "We're just grabbing a few things, so this won't take long." Martha nodded automatically, even though she wasn't sure what they were shopping for. She had barely been paying attention when her mother mentioned it earlier. It didn't matter. She wasn't really thinking about the shopping. She was thinking about the way her heart felt like it was trying to escape her ribcage. About the fact that she was stepping into the real world for the first time since last night. Would people see her differently? Would they know? She tugged her sleeve down a little, covering part of the hairband. Brenda smirked at her. "Nervous?" she murmured. Martha's stomach twisted. "I don't know." Brenda gave her a small, reassuring nudge. "You're fine. Relax." Easy for her to say. Martha forced herself to take a slow breath, focusing on the steady hum of the car engine. It's just a trip to the store. One step at a time. The grocery store was busy when they arrived. Mothers with toddlers, elderly couples moving slowly down the aisles, teenagers hanging around the front entrance, bored and restless. Martha followed her mother inside, keeping her head down, trying not to overthink every step she took. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't different. And yet, she felt exposed. Like she was walking around with a flashing sign over her head that read, "Not who you think I am." Brenda walked beside her, calm as ever, tapping away on her phone. She looked so normal. So at ease. Martha envied that. She tugged her sleeve again, but this time, Brenda caught her wrist before she could hide the hairband. Martha tensed, but Brenda just gave her a look. "Stop that," she whispered. Martha swallowed. "Nobody cares," Brenda continued under her breath. "Nobody's staring at you. You're fine." Martha forced herself to glance up, scanning the aisles. Brenda was right. No one was looking at her. The world hadn't stopped. People weren't pointing or whispering. It was all in her head. Still, it didn't stop the nervous energy buzzing beneath her skin. Her mother stopped near the produce section, scanning a list in her hand. "All right, you two go grab some bread and milk. I'll meet you by the registers." Brenda nodded, already steering Martha toward the back of the store. Martha exhaled. Just a simple errand. Nothing to be afraid of. But as they walked past the health and beauty section, Brenda suddenly stopped. Martha frowned. "What?" Brenda smirked, tilting her head toward the shelves. "We should get you something." Martha's heart lurched. "What?" Brenda rolled her eyes. "Relax. Just something small. A little mascara, maybe some clear lip gloss. Something you can keep for yourself." Martha froze. Could she do that? Could she buy something like that? Brenda sighed, like she could read Martha's mind. "It's not illegal, you know." Martha swallowed hard. "But..." "No buts," Brenda interrupted. "Do you want something?" Martha hesitated. Her fingers twitched at her sides. Then, finally, she nodded. Brenda grinned. "Good. Pick something?" Martha turned slowly toward the shelves, her pulse hammering. Rows of makeup lined the display, Lipsticks in every shade, mascara wands, shimmering eyeshadow palettes. She didn't need anything fancy. She just wanted something hers. Her eyes landed on a small, simple tube of clear lip gloss. Not flashy. Not too noticeable. Just enough. She reached for it hesitantly, half expecting some invisible force to stop her. But nothing happened. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand, feeling the weight of it. It was hers. Brenda nodded approvingly. See? That wasn't so hard. Martha exhaled, a small, nervous smile forming. No, it wasn't. And for the first time, standing in the middle of the grocery store, she felt something close to bravery. One step at a time, Martha held the small tube of lip gloss in her hand, her fingers curling around it like it was something fragile, something precious, something hers. She turned it over, watching how the store's fluorescent lights reflected off the clear plastic casing. It wasn't much, just a simple tube of gloss, something most girls wouldn't even think twice about buying. But to her, it was huge. She was standing in the middle of a grocery store, holding something meant for Martha, not Martin. And she wasn't letting go. Brenda nudged her lightly. So, you gonna buy it, or just stare at it all day? Martha swallowed hard. I don't know how. Brenda raised an eyebrow. You don't know how to buy lip gloss? Martha shot her a look. I don't know how to, she hesitated, lowering her voice. What if the cashier looks at me weird? Brenda rolled her eyes. Marty, it's lip gloss, not a stolen diamond. Nobody cares. Martha knew she was probably right. But still, she hesitated. Brenda sighed, taking the gloss from her hands. Fine. I'll buy it for you. Martha's stomach twisted. No. Brenda raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. So you do want to buy it yourself? Martha exhaled sharply. She hated how easily Brenda could see through her. But yes, she did want to buy it herself. She just didn't know if she could. Brenda smirked. All right, tell you what. I'll go through the checkout first, and you can go right after me. That way, if you panic, I'll be right there. Martha bit her lip. It was such a simple thing. Buying one tiny, insignificant thing. And yet, it felt like she was about to step onto a stage in front of 1,000 people, waiting to be judged. She clenched her jaw. One step at a time. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. Brenda grinned. Atta girl. The words sent a shiver through Martha's spine, but not in a bad way. She let Brenda lead the way toward the registers, gripping the lip gloss like it was a lifeline. The store felt louder now, the beeping of the scanners sharper, the rustling of bags more overwhelming. Her heart pounded as they reached the checkout lanes. Brenda breezed through her purchase like it was nothing. A few snacks, a bottle of soda, some random hair clips she probably didn't even need. Martha stood behind her, waiting, shifting from foot to foot. Then, too soon, it was her turn. The cashier barely glanced at her as she stepped forward. Martha hesitated before setting the lip gloss down on the conveyor belt, her pulse roaring in her ears. The cashier, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, grabbed it and scanned it without a second thought. No reaction. No questions. Just another item. Just another sale. That'll be $3.50, she said. Martha scrambled for her money, hands shaking slightly as she handed over a few crumpled bills. The cashier took them, punched a few buttons, handed her some change, and dropped the lip gloss into a small plastic bag. Have a nice day, she said, already looking past Martha to the next customer. Martha blinked. That was it? No weird looks. No awkward questions. Just normal. She grabbed the bag, turning to see Brenda waiting for her near the store exit. Brenda smirked. See? Told you. Martha let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart was still racing. But this time, it wasn't just nerves. It was something else. Something close to victory. She had done it. She had bought something for herself. For Martha. And for the first time, she realized something important. The world wasn't stopping her. The only person who had been stopping her was her. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to anymore. Martha stepped out of the store, the plastic bag clutched in her hand, her heart still beating a little too fast. The sky was bright, the sun warm against her skin, but she hardly noticed any of it. She had done it. Something so small, so seemingly insignificant, but to her, it had been everything. She had walked up to that counter, handed over her money, and bought something for Martha. Not Martin. Not the person everyone expected her to be. But her. And the world hadn't stopped spinning. Nobody had looked at her funny. Nobody had questioned why she, a boy, was buying lip gloss. Because to them, she was just another customer. Just another person. She felt like she could breathe again. Brenda walked beside her, sipping from her soda, a satisfied smirk on her face. "So, how's it feel? First ever girl purchase." Martha rolled her eyes. "It was just lip gloss." Brenda snorted. "Oh, now it's just lip gloss? Could have fooled me 5 minutes ago." Martha groaned. Okay, it was a big deal." "Happy?" Brenda grinned. "Very." Martha shook her head, but she couldn't stop the small smile creeping onto her lips. She glanced down at the bag again, her fingers tightening around the handles. It was hers, and nobody could take that away from her. Her mother was already loading the groceries into the car when they reached the parking lot. "There you two are," she said. "Everything okay?" Brenda answered before Martha could. "Yep, just had to grab one last thing." Their mother barely glanced up as she finished putting the bags in the trunk. "All right, hop in." Martha slid into the back seat, her heart still fluttering as she placed the bag beside her. She felt different. Not just because of the lip gloss, but because, for the first time, she had chosen herself. And it felt good. The drive home was quiet, just the faint sound of the radio playing some soft pop song. Martha kept her eyes on the window, watching the streets pass by, but she wasn't really seeing them. Her mind was still replaying everything. Last night. This morning. Brenda's unexpected support. The pink hairband on her wrist. The lip gloss sitting beside her. She wasn't the same person she had been yesterday. She couldn't be. Because now she knew. She knew what it felt like to be Martha. She knew what it felt like to look in the mirror and see herself staring back. And she wasn't sure she could ever go back to pretending that didn't matter. Her fingers twitched against her knee. She wanted to put the lip gloss on. Right now. The thought sent a thrill through her, something small but undeniable. She reached for the bag, hesitated, then carefully pulled the tube out, keeping it low so her mother wouldn't notice in the rearview mirror. Brenda caught the movement and smirked. Martha shot her a look. "Don't say anything." Brenda just winked and went back to her phone. Martha's hands were steady as she twisted the cap off. Her heartbeat quickened as she lifted the applicator to her lips. A soft swipe, nothing too much, just a thin, glossy layer. She pressed her lips together, the familiar sensation settling over her. And just like that, she wasn't just sitting in the back seat of a car. She was Martha, sitting in the back seat of a car. And it felt right. Brenda looked over again, raising an eyebrow. "Good choice." Martha smiled. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if she was ready to tell her parents, if she was ready for everything that came next. But for now, she had this moment. And that was enough. The car rolled to a stop in the driveway, but Martha didn't move. She sat still in the back seat, fingers curled around the tube of lip gloss in her lap, her pulse steady but alive. She could feel the slight sheen on her lips, a soft reminder that she had chosen this, that she had chosen herself. Brenda unbuckled her seatbelt with a click and turned slightly, smirking as she glanced at Martha. "You planning on living in the car now, or?" Martha let out a small, nervous laugh, tucking the lip gloss back into the shopping bag beside her. "No, just thinking." Her mother opened the driver's side door, stepping out and grabbing one of the grocery bags from the trunk. "All right, girls, let's get this inside." Martha froze. Her mother hadn't meant it. She probably just said it out of habit, not realizing. But it was there. "Girls." Brenda must have caught it too, because she threw a glance at Martha. Martha's breath caught, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't say anything. Instead, She quickly unbuckled her seatbelt, grabbed the plastic bag, and climbed out of the car, her mind spinning as she followed them inside. The moment she stepped into the house, the familiar scent of home wrapped around her. She had been here 1,000 times before, walked these hallways every day of her life. But it felt different now. She wasn't the same. She followed Brenda into the kitchen, setting the bag down on the counter while their mother started unpacking groceries. "Brenda, can you put these away?" their mother asked, handing her a few canned goods. Brenda groaned dramatically. Ugh, child labor. But she grabbed the cans anyway, moving toward the pantry. Martha lingered by the counter, feeling strangely out of place. She should go upstairs. She should do something. But before she could, her mother turned toward her with a warm smile. "Sweetie, can you hand me that bag?" Martha blinked. "What?" Her mother gestured to one of the grocery bags on the counter. "The one with the shampoo in it?" Martha hesitated, then quickly slid it over to her. Her mother chuckled. "You're a little out of it today, huh?" Martha forced a small smile. "Yeah, just tired." Her mother gave her a long look, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. "Well, get some rest later if you need to." Martha nodded quickly, grabbing her shopping bag and backing out of the kitchen. She needed space. She needed to think. Brenda caught her wrist as she passed, lowering her voice. "You okay?" Martha exhaled slowly. "I think so." Brenda squeezed her wrist lightly, then let her go. Martha took the stairs 2 at a time, shutting her bedroom door behind her and pressing her back against it. Everything was moving too fast. Her mother had called them girls. Had she meant it? Had she noticed? Martha closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for anyone to know. And yet, she didn't want to stop. She looked down at the bag in her hands, fingers tightening around the plastic. The lip gloss was inside. It was real. She was real. Martha let out a slow breath and stepped toward the mirror, reaching into the bag. She had spent so much of her life trying to disappear. Maybe it was time to exist. One step at a time.
Please subscribe my channel for the next part. And visit my Patreon page for early access.